I found a videotape in my parents' basement. I now know the disgusting truth of my childhood. Since a kid, I've always had a large scar along my throat. I never knew why, until today. My parents always told me I just had a tonsil removal when I was younger, which I never questioned until my curiosity got the better of me. I'm pretty athletic and get good test scores, but I never understood why I have been treated so special my whole life by everyone in my town. If anything, I've always felt like there was something a little bit sinister about just how obsequious everyone is in our town is toward me. Sometimes it feels a little mocking, almost menacing. Sometimes the old folks around here smile at me, like they know a secret about me that I don't know about myself. It's been this way for as long as I can remember. I've overheard my parents talking a few times about what it was like back when they were broke and pretty much ostracized here in town, which is weird because we've been really comfortable for as long as I can remember. I had my tonsils out when I was 8, and the surgeon did a bad job that left me with a scar. I have always assumed my parents must have threatened to sue and then settled or something, and that's why neither of them has to work. And we're still pretty rich. I've never been able to remember much before I was 8 years old. I think I have a lot of bad memories. I sometimes have bad dreams about kids in kindergarten and first grade teasing me a lot. I always guessed I was kind of a fat little kid, probably awkward, and that I just blocked out a lot of memories from before my life turned awesome. Life is happier when you have a knack for staying positive. My first crystal clear, vivid memory is waking up in the hospital when I was 8, after having had my tonsils out. I remember Geneva Clark, the prettiest and most popular girl in 3rd grade, standing there with her parents and handing me a cup of ice cream with a little red spoon in it and smiling shyly at me. And they were all telling me how glad they were I was okay. I don't think Geneva had cared much about me before that, but I could be wrong. Geneva's smile is burned into my brain. It's the smile I have always compared all other smiles to. Yesterday I was in our basement, just kind of poking around, and I found a box full of my dad's old home movies. One of them was labeled Ceremony, and I figured maybe it was my parents' wedding or something. My parents have always been kind of distant to me. They kind of kiss my ass too, like there is something scary or uncanny about me, which I realize is unnatural and also bad parenting. I've always been curious about what things were like for them before I came around. So when I saw this tape that I figured was their wedding ceremony, I decided to dust off an old VHS player that still works and pop it in just for shits and giggles. I did almost shit myself, but there were very few giggles. What I saw has me freaked the fuck out. The film starts rolling in a huge cavernous space that might have been the basement of one of the many mansions in the old section of town. There were big pews set up on either side of a long crimson-colored carpet, and the camera panned the carpet and then settled on a huge marble altar topped by an intricate carving unlike anything I have ever seen in a church. Instead of Christ or a cross, the altar was capped by a huge marble statue of a naked man whose naked body slithered sumptuously around the largest lyre I have ever seen. The man, boy, really, was strumming the lyre, and on his head was a crown of garlands. From the unit we did in AP English on Greek mythology, I could recognize this beautiful boy as Orpheus, although I had never seen him depicted so garishly or so erotically before. The altar was beautiful, but as I watched the tape, I ever so faintly remembered being 8 years old and staring down that long red carpet and seeing the altar and being seized by a sense of inchoate dread and incipient freak the fuck out style panic. I sat and tried to place the memory, whether it was before or after I had my tonsils out, but I just couldn't. The camera panned back and landed on me. I was apparently the star of the show. I stood there awkwardly, dressed in weird white robes. It reminded me of some half memories that popped up from time to time about being clad in white robes, but I had always dismissed that as something that happened in the hospital. The camera looked me up and down, and what it showed was a confused, fat, blubbering little boy I could hardly recognize as myself. I was standing between 2 tall men, and there were tears running down my cheek, and I was heaving great, bawling sobs. I was picking my nose frantically, and I suddenly remembered that when I was a little kid, I used to pick my nose compulsively when I was nervous. The nose picking was back before I have clear memories, before I got popular. The tall man on my left was wearing one of those Greek tragic muse masks that was white as snow, and the tall man on my right was wearing a blood-red comic muse mask. I was looking them up and down. I must have been looking desperately for some hint of tenderness or compassion, but they were just 2 tall men standing rigid and wearing masks and facing straight ahead. The camera panned back to the altar. Another very tall man walked into frame up to the altar, and he was dressed in crimson robes and a shockingly lifelike goat head mask. The goat's face looked leering and obscene. The nubby little horns made me deeply uneasy to look at, even years removed from whatever the tape was showing. The goat's tongue was sticking out of its mouth comically, but it wasn't funny at all. The man had a long dagger in his hand that looked wicked, even by the faint light of the tallow candles burning on the altar. As I sat in a chair and watched the goat-headed man on the crackling VHS tape, even though I'm now a physically intimidating 18-year-old alpha bro, I realized I had involuntarily begun to suck my thumb and pick at my nose again. Disgusted, I forced myself to grab the sides of the chair I was sitting in and continue watching the tape. The man spoke, lisped really, through his mask. This year, the Crandall family has been gracious enough to offer their son Julius for the Orphic ritual. May the ritual be a success, and may it bring another year of peace and prosperity to the town, and a lifetime of prosperity and popularity to the Crandalls and to their son. Please bring Julius down. The sound quality was horrible. Every other syllable was punctuated by crackles and hisses, and I had to rewind the tape several times to make it all out. I felt close to an emotional edge as the tape continued to play. I sat grasping the sides of the chair I was sitting on so hard my knuckles were turning white, and the panic and terror were washing over me in vast and terrible waves. It was all I could do to keep my shit together. I wanted to turn the tape off and pretend I had never found it, but I couldn't. I watched myself being led down the carpet toward the goat-headed man with the knife. I watched as I tried to turn around and run away, but 4 strong hands held me fast and guided me. The camera pinpointed a chalice on the altar and took a long, lingering shot. The camera zoomed in, and I could see that the chalice was rough and wooden, but intricately carved, although I couldn't make out any of the carvings on the old VHS tape. The camera zoomed out again, and when it zoomed back in, I was standing at the altar, knees knocking, and I was squirming against the 2 tall men who held me in place, while the man with the dagger chanted something. The sound quality on the tape was complete shit, and I couldn't make out a word of what he was saying. The priest picked up the wooden chalice and turned to face the statue on the altar. He held the chalice up toward its lips. Once he had touched Orpheus's voluptuous lips with the chalice, he turned around and guided the chalice toward my own trembling lips, as the 2 strong men held me fast. I remember now that I was still pants-pissing scared, but that I also wanted, craved, whatever was in the chalice. I still couldn't see the details on the wooden cup clearly on the tape, but like a bolt from the blue, I had vivid memories that it was a lurid, pornographic scene of nymphs and satyrs fucking in a grotto. Sitting in my chair, tears running down my cheek, I could now see that scene as clearly as I could see Geneva's smile at me in my hospital bed. The chalice touched my lips and the men made me drink, and my body went limp immediately. I crumpled up on the floor and the 3 men heaved me up onto the altar and lay me spread eagle on the altar beneath the statue of a naked, leering Orpheus, strumming his lyre. The 2 men in the comedy and tragedy masks turned to face the congregation. The camera panned to the crowd for the first time, and I could see a sea of people wearing various masks, some beautiful, some scary, and some strange. The camera focused again on the priest, who was standing over my body, dagger in hand, chanting again. He bent over and suddenly, with a startling violence, he lashed the blade of the dagger across my throat, and my body heaved and then lay motionless, save for the throbbing in my throat, as red arterial blood sprayed out and black vascular blood oozed down the pristine altar. Even through the hissing and crackling of the tape's shitty audio, I could hear the congregation gasp in unison and then begin to sing the same strange hymn in the same strange and beautiful language the man with the dagger had been chanting. My body bled out on the altar and convulsed one last time, and then I saw the same 2 men who had led me up the carpet come back into frame, this time carrying a child-sized box that I instantly realized was a coffin. The priest in the goat mask chanted another weird blessing over my body. The arterial blood had quit squirting in its great red geyser. Now there was only the gentle, undulating, almost soothing trickle of lazy black blood falling down from my throat, maculating the ground in front of the altar in great globs. The priest dragged his hand across a bloody patch near the gash in my throat, and then made a symbol of some kind on my forehead in blood. The camera panned in close, but the image is fuzzy, and at this point, while watching the tape, my heart was racing and I had involuntarily begun to sob so I couldn't tell what it was. The two men closed the lid on the ceremonial casket. "It is done," the priest said loudly. "Now our sacrificial victim is to be buried, and should the gods will it, he shall rise rejuvenated and bring prosperity to us all for another year." The tape went black. I could not bring myself to rewind it. I cannot mention it to my parents, or to anyone. I have a strange feeling I wouldn't be safe. I balled my fists up and sobbed in bewilderment and confusion and panic. I ran my hands, as I often do whenever I am nervous, across the only blemish I really have, an admittedly very large and jagged scar on my throat. My parents had always told me simply it had been a complication of the tonsil removal.